we have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Andy Humm, and welcome.
I am not Ann Northrup. I'm Gabe Gonzalez, and I'll be filling in for her today.
Great, good to be here. In the news this week, the Trump campaign to make America small again continues apace, bullying transgender people who want to serve in the military and trying to undermine the 2020 census.
Surprising very few people, I'd imagine, Trump's Secretary of the Interior, Ryan Zinke, has decided he's going to declare a war on diversity. We'll talk more about that.
Millions participated in the March for Our Lives around the globe, raising hopes for sanity in a dark time.
Connecticut Republicans voted to block the nomination of a gay man to be Chief Justice of the state. We'll talk more about him and why a Democrat joined Republicans in that vote.
In Starkville, Mississippi, they had their first LGBT pride parade, and it turned out to be the biggest parade in the history of the town.
An airport terminal in San Francisco is scheduled to be named after a gay rights activist. We'll update you on that and who it might be.
Kenya's High Court has ordered a stop to anal examinations for gay men.
And Angels in America opens on Broadway to critical acclaim. We'll give you our take, or at least Andy's.
And Ann's. She sent in a note. The Oscar-winning screenwriter of Call Me By Your Name, James Ivory, says that the male stars in the film block doing frontal nudity for themselves, even though he wrote such scenes into the movie. But we start with the new transgender troop ban that the Trump administration is trying to effect.
Sure.
We still don't have a policy on paper on this. People are trying to obtain it, but basically Trump signed something that said the military can do what they want on this.
Right.
And
it's better than a tweet, right? The first one was a tweet, so geez.
But what we're learning about this new policy, or there's this paper on it, that it was basically coordinated by Mike Pence using the religious right and Tony Perkins and the Focus on the Family and these groups lifting all this horrible anti-transgender language to try to justify, because they didn't really have a justification for it. And it seems like General Mattis, who in the beginning said, I don't have a problem with this, now is going along with this.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not sure how that shift happened, because it seemed that Mattis was one of the few pushing back the first time Trump tweeted about it. And, you know, in reality, I think a lot of the conversations that we're seeing this is less about kind of wanting to lift up the military and looking at what's behind it, right? This trans military ban certainly could impact the military negatively, but a lot of folks have been talking about how it impacts trans folks negatively, even if they don't want to join the military or are opposed to the military. Policies like this, you know, sort of establish a mentality that trans people are burdensome, that for some reason they don't fit in communities that we've established in this country. So I think the impact of this legislation moves far beyond just the military. Chase Strangio at the ACLU actually spoke about this. Well, he tweeted the other day. For me, this is about so much more than the military. This memorandum and the trans military ban are part of a concerted effort at all levels of our government to deny and erase trans existence. The consequences are deadly and far-reaching.
Absolutely. And Joshua Block of the ACLU had a good quote on this too, saying that trans people can serve in the military under this, but only as their birth gender. He said it's akin to saying that Jewish people can serve if they convert to Christianity. And don't worry, that's on the agenda with Mike Pence for sure.
Geez, I wouldn't be surprised, man.
You know, now a lot of these cases are in court already, right, about the transgender ban. And all the courts have said you can't do this, so you don't have a justification for it. So the government is now trying to say, well, it's moot now because there is no policy plan to enforce, and we want to get out from all of these injunctions that say we can't start doing this and stop. Right. And what are the things that they're bringing up in this policy? It's so retro. They're using the old shower argument.
Absolutely, it's ridiculous.
It's going to make cisgendered soldiers uncomfortable. It will disadvantage. Oh, listen to this. They actually say this. It will disadvantage biological females in competition with trans females in athletics and training. I mean, And cohesion, bringing this up again, will deteriorate.
I mean,
if prejudice is not catered to. I mean, it's so ugly and it's so vicious.
Bringing up the same topics, though, but when you actually speak to people who are serving in the military, especially trans folks who are serving in the military, what we're seeing time and time again is that unit cohesion is not, in fact, affected, that trans folks are not costing the military an undue amount of money to go through these surgeries that they keep mentioning every time they try to do a trans military ban. They really focus on gender confirmation surgery, which to me is, it's a dog whistle. It's meant to demonize trans folks and make them seem strange, foreign, a threat to kind of the society that the military has established.
Now, Professor Arthur Leonard, our gay legal eagle, wrote about this for the Gay City News, and he worries that this, as bad as this is, it may give them some cover, because the argument they're going to make is that it meets the standard for judicial deference to the military.
Sure.
If the military says and has some justification, however big it, however it is, then we've given you a reason. Now leave us alone, and we can do whatever we want.
Right.
But the lawyers in all the 6 cases say they don't think that's true. They think there's nothing new here, and that they're still going to prevail in the courts, and we will see. I mean, this has been condemned widely. Even the American Psychiatric Association condemned it as discriminatory.
Absolutely,
and as I said, 6 federal courts have ruled on that. So it's ugly. Other Trump stuff, shall we move on to?
Yeah, let's talk about Ryan Zinke, who's the Secretary of the Interior, a department that, we sort of gloss over every now and then. It doesn't get a lot of attention, but I think with Zinke in office, it certainly has.
Well, he's a big despoiler of the environment.
That he is. How appropriate that he was appointed to the very department that should take care of it. But what he's making headlines for lately are reports, unconfirmed, some anonymous, that Ryan Zinke has spoken out against diversity at his office. According to CNN, 3 high-ranking Interior officials from 3 different divisions said that Zinke has made several comments with a similar theme, saying something along the lines of "diversity isn't important," "I don't care about diversity," or "I don't really think that is important anymore."
Well, look at what's happened. On the executive staff, there are 33 senior executive staff, 15 of whom are people of color who have been shifted to other jobs. Like, you're going to go work in Utah even though you were based in Washington, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that's what he's been doing. Some have filed grievances with the US Merit Systems Board. I didn't even know we had a US Merit Systems Board, but that's where they're trying to appeal to. All right.
What I think is interesting, though, is that Heather Swift, who is Secretary Zinke's, I was going to call her a publicist, but she's a spokeswoman. She said that the anonymous claims made against the secretary are untrue, so we should add that. But it doesn't seem like a far stretch to imagine Ryan Zinke saying he is unconcerned with such issues.
She doesn't sound too swift to me. All right. We've kind of buried the headline, which is John Bolton being brought on to head the NSA, the National Security Administration. This guy is a monster, wants to start World War III, has openly said publicly, I want to bomb Iran, I want to bomb North Korea. And of course, that could lead us into a world war with China and Russia, who are allies there. He still supports the Iraq War. That it still justifies the Iraq War, which was a disaster, and that even a candidate named Donald Trump condemned. And but now what's coming out is that he chaired something called the Gatestone Institute that pushes the view of Islam as a threat to the West in lurid terms. They do stories like the migrant rape crisis and how the United Kingdom is an Islamist colony, and they bring highly infectious diseases. He is a monster.
Absolutely.
Now, he doesn't need Senate confirmation to be the head of the NSA.
That is correct.
But you do need a security clearance, and because of his ties to some of these Russian things, and he might be able to stop them. But
I mean, that might be the only thing that could potentially impede his ability to do his job. But at this point, it's terrifying. And what you mentioned about Trump earlier, so ironic to me, right? Trump was opposed to the Iraq War. Early on, Trump said that he wouldn't hire any Bush lackeys, that was absolutely ridiculous, that he'd run the country differently. And here we are, a little over a year into his time in office, and the first person he decides to put into that position after firing the first one is one of the worst Bush lackeys I could imagine.
But
it's wild.
If you are watching this show right now, the war hasn't started yet. So that's a positive.
We are all still alive.
If you are hearing our voice. And then there's the whole Stormy Daniels thing this week. Any thoughts about that? No big reveals, but she said her life was threatened in front of her child. And then there's the whole business of the $130,000 illegal campaign donation.
Yeah.
We don't have to belabor it. Everybody knows about it.
The big takeaway for me was how shocked I was at how handsome Stormy Daniels' lawyer was. But the interview was certainly insightful. And I have seen some leads on that story about who threatened Stormy Daniels. So hopefully we can get a little more confirmation or information on that, because I think it's a very important story.
But CNN had a group of middle-aged women who were Trump supporters.
Oh, no way.
One of them was even African-American, and they're all sitting there watching Stormy Daniels during the interview, and then they're going to react to it. And no one believed Stormy. And one of them said, "I want hard proof." Without irony, she said that. They also said that God has ordained Trump to be president. And you can't argue with people like that if that's what they believe.
I mean, that's religious extremism. And the fact that we can't call it as such in this country is wild to me. But that is, honestly, that's
psychosis.
Some pretty wild stuff. And, sometimes I wonder if these networks do sort of bring in some of the most wild subjects they can imagine, for ratings, but the fact of the matter is there are so many Trump supporters that do believe that. It kind of echoes the whole Roy Moore sentiment we saw during his campaign. Where
some of them watch the show and give us criticisms, and we welcome criticisms from you if you think we're being unfair, but we try to be fair. How can you be fair to the Department of Health and Human Services when they are spending $312 million to implement a regulation that essentially allows doctors to step away from a dying patient, even if they're the only ones who could save them based on a warped notion of religious freedom and conscience?
Absolutely.
$312 million. Now, on the other hand, maybe we should talk about the Human Rights Campaign Healthcare Equality Index. Do you know about this?
Yeah, we've talked about this a little bit. Talk to me about what are the numbers you're looking at?
Well, it's just out that the 626 healthcare facilities participated. You can go to, do we have it up there? You can go to hrc.org and read this. 418 of the healthcare facilities got a 100% rating based on their policies around LGBTQ issues. 900 more were researched by them, so it's a useful guide to find out if a facility that you're thinking of going to has been trained to deal with gay people, etc.
It is encouraging, but I'm sure there will be parts of the country where you might not be able to access a gay-friendly hospital, and I think those are the situations where we can't count on the hospitals to do it all on their own. So it's a little scary thinking about what the Department of Health and Human Services could do to our healthcare system and the health of queer people in the future.
I mean, my sister was, used to live in Texas not too long ago, and she was going in for an operation, and they said, "We're going to pray for you now before they have." And she was like, "Please, I'd rather just bring some skilled people in here.
Sure, yeah.
Who are going to do the job right. You're not going to pray for me.
Yeah,
please."
Oh, all right. That's wild.
Now, the other big controversy of the week was the census.
Yeah.
Let's talk about why that is such an important issue for us all to be concerned about.
Absolutely. The census has announced that they will be adding a question about citizenship, right? So I think people were a bit confused as to how to react to this. Is it good that we might finally start counting undocumented folks and, giving them the numbers to impact how they're represented at the state level, at the federal level? But on the other hand, you have to think about the administration we're working under right now and what Trump might do with that information, what Trump has already done with a lot of records that have been sent to the federal government to help people with DACA and stuff like that. So what I've seen overwhelmingly is a lot of particularly Latino advocacy groups coming out against this decision, right? If you are intimidating folks into not participating in the census, that's going to affect how people are counted. It's going to affect how immigrants and queer immigrants are counted. It's going to affect how first-generation immigrants who might be citizens in this country but have undocumented family could be counted. So the impact on this next decade, we'll wait until we start counting each other again, is really, really terrifying. And while I think it is helpful to start counting undocumented populations for the purposes of helping them, offering them services, getting in touch with what members of our own communities need, I am really, really scared about the impact that this question could have in terms of participation.
So 12 or more attorneys general around the country are suing and saying this is unconstitutional. The Constitution says you must count all persons. It doesn't matter whether they're citizens or not. It's just an enumeration. Now, questions like this, can be put into a survey if you're trying to.
It doesn't have to be in the census.
Right.
Yeah, that's the thing.
That's right. And this it's obvious why they're doing this. It's going to probably reduce the essentially reduce the populations of Florida, Texas, all these states.
Absolutely. And the census routinely runs surveys on different populations in between the years that the census is taken. So there's absolutely no reason to put this question on the census. As you mentioned, I think there is a constitutional issue here. I'm glad these attorney generals are stepping forward to sort of challenge this. And hopefully the census in 2020 won't have a question that will discourage people from participating. And
so the census in 2020 is very important, and that it's the basis on which reapportionment will be done for House districts around the country, and that's why it's so important for you to vote every time. I don't know how much I have to emphasize this. We didn't vote in 2010, which is when the state legislatures were elected that would use the reapportionment of the 2010 census to do the. And we got. This is why we're in the position. One of the reasons we're in the position that we're in. All right, Betsy DeVos this week. Did you read about this? She canceled a visit to something called the Frederick Classical Charter School because she was going to be protested by a transgender student from a nearby school who heard that she was going to be there. And also the parents at the charter school said they weren't even told that she was going to be there.
That's shocking to me. I would not want...
They were sent... the kids were sent home do you mind if we take your kid's picture? We're having a guest speaker. Do you mind if we take pictures?
Come on now. Come on, you always ask who the guest is. I certainly would. I don't want my kid in a photo op with Betsy DeVos.
And then, I don't know if you think this is a sign of progress, but we told you about the bunny books by the vice president's daughter, Charlotte Pence. She wrote one. So John Oliver and his crew did a gay one. Charlotte Pence says that she bought the gay one. Bought a copy of the gay one because it goes to good charities, which are AIDS United and Trevor Project. Well, she's got her bunny going to focus on the family.
I know, exactly, right? Yeah, it's, maybe she might be trying to even it out at the end of the day, but yeah, I'm not putting much faith in her bunny, sorry.
And then, Gabe, what do you think of this? The nomination of the openly gay Richard Grenell to be ambassador to Germany is still being held up, and he's a right winger, and he's got a lot of tough things in his background, which is why Democrats are putting a hold on him. But Republicans are saying, no, we want this gay guy to be the ambassador.
I don't know. I think it's interesting when conservatives in government decide they want to champion LGBT causes, and it seems to be when it's convenient to them. To be honest, I feel like most politicians are like this. I don't put a lot of stock in politicians to really stand up for our communities. But I think it's wild. They're obviously just sort of throwing it out there as kind of a hook to be like, oh, all right, liberals support gay people. Well, we've got a gay person. Well, it's like, I don't blindly support a queer person in anything. I would love to know what your opinions are before I choose to place my support behind you.
I didn't like that Roy Cohn, more about whom later when we talk about Angels in America. He was a homosexual. Although there's a line in the play that he's not. It's confusing. Shall we talk about the March for Our Lives?
I think we should. I think that's some good news.
Did you march?
Yes, I did.
I did too, in New York.
Yeah, it was exciting. It was really, really exciting. There were a lot of people out. I think
millions of people around the globe. I mean, 800,000 in Washington, which was the main march, where the young people spoke, and only young people spoke. They didn't let the politicians speak. There were, easily 150,000 in New York, and it was all across the globe marching for gun control.
Actually, the morning of the March for Gun Control, my boyfriend was watching German TV. German news, because he speaks German and likes to watch it in German, I guess. But what's wild is that morning, German news stations were overwhelmingly covering the March for Our Lives. It was truly an international event. And it's wild to sort of see gun rights and gun control in this country turn from a domestic issue or a local issue into a truly international one. Because I think at this point, our gun death rate is wild. It's wildly, it's insanely high, especially when compared to other first world countries.
By multiples of like 10, 20, 30, 100, essentially, is the rate from gun deaths. And this has become an issue. When I was in the march, as you were, so over the weekend, during the week, I watched a repeat of Amy Goodman's show on Democracy Now!, and she had the speeches from Washington almost in full from a lot of the young people. Yeah. And I just sat there weeping the whole time listening to this. I mean, they were so, not just because they were so moving, but they were so good. And so on top of things, and of course, one of the big stars is Emma Gonzalez. And they are saying that there she is, her speech where she spoke for 6 minutes and 20 seconds, which was the time it took for the killer to kill 17 at her Parkland Marjorie Stoneham Douglas High School. They said it was like the most. I want to get the exact line here. That it was, where is the line about the speech? Well, 6 minutes and 20 seconds that could change the world. It was one of the most affecting things that I've ever seen in my life. And of course, she is the head of the Gay Straight Alliance at her school. Absolutely. She's openly bisexual. She's been attacked as a skinhead lesbian by right-wingers.
She also got attacked for wearing the Cuban flag on her jacket. Her family is of Cuban descent. And of course, these right-wingers, these virulent right-wingers who insist on attacking high schoolers, I don't just mean disagreeing with their ideas, I mean personal attacks and really picking on these kids, started calling her a skinhead communist, a supporter of Castro, as if those things were mutually exclusive with her gun control positions. I found that wild, and I think the attacks that people like Steve King from Iowa have been launching against these young adults. He's the big
anti-immigrant.
Absolutely.
Congressman.
Yeah.
Now, what did he do?
He tweeted out, if you're a teenager and believe you won't be responsible enough to own a gun at 21, why should you vote before 21? So absolutely derailing this issue, somehow coming out on the side of raising our voting age, and at the same time trying to disparage these young people. And it just seems desperate at this point. It's wild to see these young people come out with very articulate, sound policy ideas. Perhaps you might not agree with all of them, but to see politicians, elected officials in this country, respond to that policy suggestion from a young person by demeaning them is really quite discouraging.
They're scared of them.
Absolutely, and they're going to start voting.
They're terrified of them. I mean, I think that Emma Gonzalez is up to 2 million Twitter followers at this point. I think it was about 800,000 before. It's up to 2 million now. So she has a lot of power, and she's using it very properly. And they're also commenting upon, now she's a Latina, they're also commenting about the fact that the Parkland kids, they've featured a lot of the white ones, but they made a point of integrating African Americans and Latinx people in their demonstrations, in the speeches. You even had the granddaughter of Martin Luther King speaking at the rally, but kids affected by gun violence in Chicago, all that was there.
Yeah, and I appreciate that David Hogg and Cameron Kasky have also taken the time to speak out about young folks around the country, specifically young folks of color, who have also been protesting against gun violence and didn't necessarily get that support. So I think it's so encouraging to see these young adults and these teenagers listening, calling people in, really expanding the umbrella that this movement covers, and truly, I think, creating a kind of intersectional effort to change gun laws in this country.
I think it's going to change everything. I think it's going to be the basis of movement across the progressive spectrum as well. And they appreciate that, and Emma, of course, embraces the fact that she's a bisexual, and that's part of it. Also, Gays Against Guns was in the New York demonstration, and 100 of them went to Washington. But this is from the New York thing. They do this thing called the Human Beings. They've been doing it since the Pulse massacre, and they carry the pictures of people killed in mass shootings ever since the Pulse, and that includes a lot of them. And also, our associate producer in New York ran into a singer at the march in New York. Bill, why don't you tell us about your encounter here?
Yeah, hi, Andy. Hi, Gabe.
Hey.
I was just marching down 6th Avenue, and who I come across was Paul McCartney. And it was quite amazing. We marched about 3 or 4 blocks together, and he was very giving of his time. And he said he was there at the march because his best friend was a victim of gun violence.
Wow.
Of course, John Lennon.
Right, John Lennon was killed at 72nd Street in Central Park West, at outside the Dakota where he lived, which is the reason that he was there.
And I was able to tell Paul that the night John was shot, I was DJing at Club Hurrah, just 10 blocks away from the Dakota, and played Beatles music till dawn because people stayed in the club till like sunrise. And but he was just a really wonderful person to be there, and that he was there by himself, I think with his wife, and no big security detail. He was just part of the march.
Right, it was very moving to see him there. Thanks, Bill.
You're welcome.
Okay. All right, anything more on the march?
Well, I did want to talk about those price tags that I kept seeing. Did you see them, these little orange tags? I saw a lot of them in photos from DC.
No.
So they're quite interesting. A lot of young folks, a lot of the Florida students were wearing these orange price tags on their arm with the dollar amount, $1.05, $1.05, I think it was. And they basically got that number by taking the amount that the NRA had donated to Marco Rubio and dividing it by the number of students in Florida, essentially claiming that that was the cost of a young life to Marco Rubio for taking NRA donations. I thought that was a really a very effective sort of visual cue. I saw it, I didn't know what it was, and I looked it up, and I thought it was just a really brilliant decision.
Right. You're making me think of Chris Rock's solution to the whole gun problem, which is to charge $5,000 a bullet, and then you'd have your guns. You have as many guns as you want, but if you want to use those bullets, that's what it's going to cost you.
There you go. I think that's great. I'd support it.
All right. So we take up some other national news.
Yeah, absolutely.
By the way, speaking of violence, in Houston, there was an out-of-control driver who intentionally drove his car into several people, killing one in the Montrose area outside a gay bar. They said there was a fight. Don't have a lot of other details about this, but that was pretty horrendous.
That's wild.
And then look what they did in Connecticut.
Oh, let's talk about this. So Connecticut Republicans and one Democrat voted to block the nomination of a gay man to be Chief Justice of the state. The vote was 19-16, and the justice's name was Andrew J. McDonald, who's currently serving as a judge in Connecticut, but he was nominated to...
On the High Court.
Yeah, on the High Court. But what's interesting is that the Democrat and the Republicans opposed him for different reasons, right? The Republicans opposed him because McDonald voted for a repeal of capital punishment in the state of Connecticut, which Republicans felt was too liberal for a justice on the High Court.
Well, I mean, they had passed the law that repealed the death penalty, but not for people sitting on death row, because they wanted to fry some people who especially had committed egregious crimes. But when you get rid of the death penalty, you got to get rid of it.
Absolutely, yeah. I don't see why we couldn't apply it retroactively. It seems ridiculous. So that was sort of like the one thing that Republicans kept harping on. The one Democrat that voted against him, however, spoke to some ethics concerns, perhaps the justice's proximity to the governor of the state. So I think there are quite a few issues here, but overall I think a lot of folks in Connecticut are sort of seeing it as a gay individual being denied the opportunity that they're more than qualified for. McDonald
is close to Governor Malloy, and he really called out the Republicans, and he said it was all about homophobia, and if you have a gay friend or you are gay or relative, you should vote against all these Republicans. That's what he said. All right. Okay. In Louisiana, the Supreme Court there rejected by 4-3 even hearing Governor John Bel Edwards' attempt to revive the executive order to protect LGBT people in state employment. They're just not having it. So they refused to hear the arguments. But better news from San Francisco, where an airport terminal is going to be named for Harvey Milk. Now, you know, in 2013, a supervisor named David Campos there tried to get the whole airport named for Harvey Milk. They weren't having that.
Not at all.
But it would be nice. Maybe right-wing people won't want to fly into San Francisco anymore if they name it. I was always reluctant to go into Reagan Airport in Washington.
Yeah, it's true. I don't really think about the names a lot. Although, however, with this effort, they will also be including artwork that honors Milk. So you'll really get to see him, and I feel like the presence will be felt. It'll be at Terminal 1, not the whole airport. Right. But the decision isn't finalized yet. So they really have to, there are a few steps before they move forward with it.
Okay. Anything you want to? Where are we? Where were we on our list?
Gosh.
You want to talk about?
I would love to talk about Starkville.
Well, let's talk about Linda Brown, though.
Absolutely.
Because we've got her next on our list. Linda Brown passed away this week. She was the daughter of the man, Brown versus Board of Education, who sued for integrating the schools in Topeka, Kansas. Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka. And she passed away at the age of 76 this week. You know, she was a civil rights trailblazer, and she was 76 years old. The decision was in 1954. She later became an education consultant and a public speaker. Linda Brown. Okay, now, Starkville.
Let's talk about Starkville.
Go ahead.
Surprise, surprise, the first ever Pride Parade was also the biggest, but I am so excited to talk about this because it's a story we talked about last time.
Should we talk about it while we run the footage
yes,
from the parade?
Yes, please. I would love to see that.
Keep it sound under so we can talk.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Look at that. So we talked last time I was here about Starkville,
Mississippi.
Yes, Starkville, Mississippi, this group that wanted to put together a pride parade and faced pushback from a local board.
They rejected it, the Board of Aldermen.
They rejected it, and it finally ended up happening. It's the city's first. A lot of people spoke about the protest feeling pretty warm reception. It's not a ton of people turning out, but it's a great impact, you know, for young queer people in that city to sort of see representation, this movement, to be out publicly and unafraid of what you're representing and sort of who you are.
The only protesters were from out of town, from the Consuming Fire Fellowship.
That's
but
quite a name there,
It was mostly a warm reception.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the police cooperated completely.
The mayor was in favor of the parade as well. It was really the Board of Aldermen that were opposed to it. So I'm glad it finally happened.
I can remember in New York in the Pride Parade where sometimes police would turn their backs on us when we were passing them.
Yeah,
but that's not true now.
Yeah.
They dance with us,
yeah,
et cetera. So
there are a lot of dancing cops at Prides lately.
Good.
Yeah.
All right. In Kansas, a wedding venue in a place called Haysville, Haysville, a place called the Cottage View, they turned away a gay couple. The owner, Kathleen Garrison, said, she's a devout Catholic, and as long as there is a First Amendment, her ban will stand. There is no statewide law banning discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. The couple does not plan legal action, which they could try on the basis of gender. The U.S. Supreme Court is going to decide whether those laws can be overridden by religious freedom. So we'll see about that. And in Washington State, Governor Jay Inslee signed the law banning conversion therapy today, Wednesday as we tape, and Milwaukee became the first city in Wisconsin to ban conversion therapy. Okay. In New York State, Cynthia Nixon said that she's mounting this real progressive challenge to Governor Andrew Cuomo. The New York Times, Frank Bruni, attacked her for her inexperience, comparing it to Donald Trump. That's grotesque.
That's wildly.
Donald Trump is a monster.
Yeah.
Cynthia Nixon is a progressive activist. Now, yes, some people are saying, oh, she should run for city council or something. And I'm like, Andrew Cuomo, the first office he ran for was statewide. He ran for a state attorney general, and he won. You know, look, we'd love to have Cynthia come on here. We'd love to have the governor come on here and defend his record. So.
Yeah, but that's the thing. It's, you know, Cynthia Nixon does have a history of being involved in local politics, in statewide politics, of knowing the information that's really kind of driving queer people to be concerned about these issues. She is a bisexual woman. She's openly come out as this. She's married to a woman. So I don't think that comparison quite holds. You know what I mean? Donald Trump may have seemed like a shrewd businessman to some, but he was certainly not involved in politics as an activist, as an informed citizen. So, you know, I think Nixon isn't coming totally new to this game. You know what I mean?
And the experience that most politicians have is raising money from people who just want to warp the agenda. The governor, Cuomo, has $30 million in his war chest. Who the hell do you think is giving him that money?
Absolutely.
The big real estate interests, et cetera. All right. Sad news from Florida. Now, you all saw that horrible bridge collapse there at International University. Among the dead were a gay couple. their names were Osvaldo Gonzalez. We have a lot of Gonzalezes.
There are a lot of Gonzalezes in Florida. I'll tell you that.
And Alberto Arias. They were together for 21 years. They were laid to rest together. They owned a party business. Yeah. Their families are filing wrongful death suits on their behalf. That was a really horrible thing.
It's a shame. While you and I were talking about this before the show, it seems that it took a while for it to come out that this was an openly gay couple. It wasn't necessarily reported. And there is a very vibrant LGBTQ scene in South Florida, in Miami, in West Palm Beach. It's where I come from. It's that's where we take spring break and go down and act gay while our parents weren't around. It's fantastic. And so I think to sort of see really how that impacts the queer community there and how this tragedy is sort of still impacting people in Florida is a bummer.
I'm glad they were not erased from history. And what did you think about this development in the Pulse massacre case? They're trying the wife of Omar Mateen as a collaborator. Yeah. But what came out this week is that his father, Sadiq Mateen, you might remember him going on television and actually condemning his son, turns out to have been an FBI informant from 2005 until 2016.
And the FBI tried to hide it from Omar Mateen's wife and from being released to the public in general.
And they tried to recruit Mateen to be an informant as well.
Yeah.
So all this is, throwing the case against the wife into some doubt, actually, but wow, it's a wild story.
Definitely.
All right. In California, we told you that Dianne Feinstein was facing some opposition in the Democratic Party for her re-election to the US Senate at the age of 85. But Equality California endorsed her, said nice things about her opponent, Kevin DeLeon, as well. They both have 100% ratings. But, Equality California said, she stood with our community back when few others did. That is untrue. When she was mayor of San Francisco, she vetoed the domestic partners bill, for God's sakes. Again, has she changed? Of course, but...
Yeah, she's really toed the line on queer issues, and she's changed, so have many other Democrats and other politicians, but I don't think it doesn't mean we can't do better, you know what I mean? I hear this a lot, young people who are very politically active hear this a lot as well. It's like, oh, you should be grateful to the work this person has put in, they're on your side now. I am eternally grateful. I am so happy to have an advocate and an ally. That said, I think queer citizens can always search for better advocates and better allies to fill those positions.
And people shouldn't hold these positions for life.
Absolutely, you have to earn it.
The only position that should be held for life is co-host of USA for 33 years. We're looking for other people to take over, and some of you have volunteered. That's great. And we're looking for women as well. If you're interested, send us an email.
Please do.
Okay. What do you think about the fact that Craigslist has shut down their personal ads due to a federal law that holds websites liable for users who misuse personal ads? It's the FOSTA law that was passed overwhelmingly. FOSTA. What do you think about all this?
So going back to this law,
they say they're fighting trafficking.
Right, they're fighting trafficking, but rather. It is absolutely insane. So essentially what the law does is punish websites for hosting personals ads that could be construed as sex work or might offer sex or intimacy in exchange for money. The thing is, sex workers have been using websites like this that openly post these personals ads to keep all their work above board, right? To make sure that they're interacting with a person who isn't some creeper, who isn't just appearing out of nowhere, so they don't have to go to the streets. They can take their work online, right? So many sex workers have said, if you're actually concerned with human trafficking, target the Johns, right? Target the actual human smugglers, but don't target websites like, what's it called, Backpage, for example. You know what I mean? And we did see that FBI raid on Rent Boy several years ago.
Yes, they closed them down.
Yeah, that was absolutely terrifying. There were so many gay men who, already working as sex workers. You put a lot at risk. You're putting a lot on the line. You might not necessarily have healthcare coverage guaranteed with your job. So you're really going out there on a limb, and I think this added level of security provided by personals ads on Craigslist, Backpage, Rent Boy sort of helped them feel secure about what they were doing.
What do you think about what's going on in Seattle, where in King County, which is Seattle, the DA's office took $140,000, police actually, they took a $140,000 grant from an anti-prostitution group called Demand Abolition of Prostitution.
Okay.
And they started rounding up Johns in unprecedented numbers. They want to ban sex work entirely. They've increased their arrests 50%. They conducted stings against people on prostitution, not just people who are seeking other adults.
Right. Yeah.
Not, you want to go after people who try to pick up kids, but it's all being funded by a billionaire, one of the Hunt, who was heir to the oil fortune.
Absolutely.
I think it's
Yeah. Well, going back to this Craigslist thing, though, I do have to have a moment of silence for Craigslist. Back when I was a closeted college student in Providence, Rhode Island, I met my first boyfriend through a Craigslist ad.
Good for
you. It was
you.
wild. We dated for 2 years. It was really funny. We were both, we were exchanging emails, and it was like, I'm very masculine. Let's meet up. And he was like, oh, I'm actually bailing on a date with a woman to come hang out with you. We were both flaming homosexuals, and we had a great time. We ended up dating for 2 years. We don't talk anymore, but I will always have fond memories of the Craigslist personals ad section. It was one of my first forays into gay romance.
I met my first boyfriend in college in church. I did. There were other ways that I met people as well.
I'm about to start going to church again, Andy. That was wild.
I am a committed anti-theist at this point. And I'm especially upset about the fact that in Ohio they're trying to ban all abortions, and they're trying to do that everywhere in this country. And they may succeed if Trump gets his ways with the courts. What about what's going on in Sacramento, where the LGBT Community Center is getting threats to destroy every member of the community, handwritten and signed? Scary.
Yeah, so this LGBT center has been getting these death threats, and they've said, representatives of the center and community members who've stood up for it have said, we're absolutely not shutting down. We're here for the community. We're here to serve them. I know California is certainly a state that would respond quickly to threats like that. Many cities in that state have a record of defending LGBT rights and taking those threats very seriously. But I'm also worried about, what might happen if that happens somewhere else in a city that's not as accepting of an LGBT center.
Things are getting out of hand, and we're losing one of our big LGBT groups in a bit of a scandal. Get Equal, we've heard us talk about them over the years. They're closing up shop. They had a social media scandal, and they're $1 million in the hole, apparently. And a lot of donations to these groups apparently went down after marriage was enacted by the courts in 2015. So,
well, I mean, that's what happens when you put gay marriage at the forefront of a movement. You know what I mean? I don't think it's a bad thing to do, but certainly you want to expand how you can advocate for the LGBT community. And I think we have seen some organizations sort of scramble after marriage was settled with what issue they'd like to pick up or what issue they should be responding to.
And we neglected to put up the picture. We meant to do it at the top of the show when we were talking about transgender troops, the trans woman who was killed. Can you still find that? I'll just talk about it. The trans woman, Amia Tyree Berryman, 28 years old, shot and killed in Baton Rouge on Tuesday, the 7th known homicide of a transgender person this year. The police have no suspects. And in other crime news, I've been covering the trial of Abel Cedeno, the bullied Bronx teen who tried to fight back against being beaten up in school, had a knife, ended up killing a classmate. It turns out that same day of that incident in the high school, the brother of the deceased went to the school and started robbing the witness students and threatening them at knife point, taking their cell phones and saying, tell me where his lives, tell me where his family lives, I want to kill them, I don't care if I go to jail. This has been going on. So Abel, who was out on bail, and his whole family have had to move and are living in an undisclosed location. And the courts are not doing anything about this, giving him an order of protection against this brother who is 18 years old and wants to avenge his brother.
And it's pretty tragic because, I mean, you look at this and it seems like everybody involved is essentially a victim, right?
Yes.
Abel reacted in defense at being bullied.
Yes.
And it seems like it's something that spiraled out of control. So I'm really hoping this can be resolved in a sensible and compassionate way. It's really sad to hear about. There was also another death of a trans woman we'd like to talk about. Her name was Noemi Hersey. She was killed in London. She lived in the U.S. for some time. She was 36 when she was murdered. She was of Somali origin. And after her death, a lot of neighbors came together to pay tribute to her. It seems like she was very known and beloved throughout her community. They said she was a big fan of music and a very vibrant personality to be around. Sadly, her last post on Twitter was actually an article from Vice about how the epidemic of violence facing trans women has gone unabated and needs to be taken seriously.
Right. And police often don't even find people connected with these crimes. But in this case, they made two arrests, a 24-year-old named Jesse McDonald and a 17-year-old. They don't name people who are underage when they arrest them in Britain. All right. Other international news.
See, we've got the decision in Kenya that we could certainly talk about. So for the longest time, Kenya was doing these forced anal examinations, rectal exams of gay men, as we've talked about before on the show, you've talked about before on the show. In Kenya, a lot of homosexual behavior has been criminalized. We've seen multiple international human rights groups try to fight this.
You can face a 14-year sentence. Maybe they don't dish it out. That's what's on the books. 14 years for sodomy.
Yeah. So in this instance, the National Gay and Lesbian Human Rights Commission took the case of two men who were arrested in 2015 on suspicion of having sex. That was the charge, the suspicion of having homosexual sex, and pushed this case until this decision was passed this year. So they were arrested in 2015. It took about three years for this decision to be finalized. According to the two men, authorities forced them to undergo anal examinations by hospital staff and security personnel. They also said authorities forced them to submit to HIV tests. The group that represented them argued that the test violated the men's constitutional rights, and a Kenyan court in 2016 ruled that such tests were constitutional and as such within the scope of use for authorities. But Thursday's decision overturned that rule. Right. So thankfully, we are seeing some progress in that country in terms of defending LGBTQ citizens there and making sure that they're not being targeted.
There's sort of some progress in Romania, where a top politician from the ruling party wants to institute civil partnerships, but they might want to also change the constitution to ban same-sex marriage explicitly. So it's, you win and you lose. In China, the Beijing International Film Festival pulled the Call Me By Your Name film, gay-themed, as the country tightens its grip on media content. In Croatia, thousands marched against a European agreement designed to protect women, but that they say will legitimize same-sex marriage and protect trans people, God forbid. We are against gender ideology. That's one of the favorite phrases of the Pope. Anyway, 2/3 of the people actually do support this convention. Anything else from the international scene?
No, I don't think so. It might be time to review.
Well, we got a couple of AIDS news notes.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
ABC 7 reporter in Los Angeles, Carl Schmid, has come out as HIV positive. He's been living with it for over a decade. He said, for anyone who's ever doubted themselves because of these scary 3 letters and 1 symbol, let me tell you this, you are somebody who matters. There's still a lot of stigma around this. Actually, in some ways, it's harder to come out now these days, I think, than it was in the old days.
Absolutely.
The HHS has, the Health and Human Services Department has stripped lesbian, bisexual content from the Women's Health website. More outrages. And then the CDC is reporting that the HIV rate among gay and bi men 25 to 34 rose 45%.
Jesus
between
Christ.
2015 and 2018, while the overall rate dropped. And it's up 25% among Latino men who have sex with men. The overall rate has declined 11%. So obviously these are the issues that we have to work on.
Yeah, this is what's troublesome, that we keep seeing reports that the overall rate of HIV transmission and seroconversion is going down, but we are also seeing certain communities where it hasn't gone down. The number has stayed the same or it's gone up. Black and or Latino men are disproportionately impacted by this. A lot of that has to do with cultural stigma as well as access to healthcare, affordable access. I mean, I've even spoken to friends that I went to a private liberal arts school, and I have friends that have moved out to the Midwest and have had a hard time getting a PrEP prescription from a doctor because the doctor either doesn't know what it is or doesn't want to prescribe it. It's really, really
outrageous.
Wild. Yeah, and it goes back to the Health and Human Services story we were talking about earlier, where we really need federal solutions to these issues. We can't keep relying on local governments.
Yes, we are getting federal solutions from the Trump administration. It's called genocide.
Jesus.
All right, and opposition is building to Robert Redfield to be head of the CDC. Some people are supporting him, but there's a big letter going around from some AIDS activists saying that he rejected quick fixes such as condoms and clean needles, and we need to reject those who try to replace God as the judge. So he's got some religious issues that we have to be concerned about. All right, entertainment news. Before we run out of time, maybe we should, let me just dispose of a couple of shows that I saw this week. Well, I did see Frozen from Disney, as directed by the estimable Michael Grandage, who used to run the Donmar Warehouse in London. It's quite a spectacle, but other than Let It Go, it's not the best score from Bobby Lopez, a great composer, and his wife, Kirsten Anderson Lopez. I did love the reindeer and the snowman, though, I must say. All right. The other shows I saw this week, Escape to Margaritaville, which is the Jimmy Buffett musical.
What?
It's all Jimmy Buffett songs, right? It's so...
I didn't know this existed.
It's in a big Broadway theater. It's so cynical. All they want to do is, if you like Jimmy Buffett, they're going to take this show to your hometown and say, direct from Broadway, the Broadway hit. It's an insult in terms of the book writing.
Really?
It's just so witless.
I mean, I don't know what we'd imagine.
And then Bill and I went to see Rocktopia, which is sort of a Vegas-style mix of pop and classical, but way overproduced and amplified. Bill, you stayed for the second half. What'd you think?
It got worse in the second half, and it was rock and roll classics, paint by the numbers. It was just terrible.
Oh, no.
But Anne wants us to know that the new American Idol, which she initially found boring, is now getting, she's getting sucked into it. And they've got Journey, an 18-year-old lesbian with a stunning voice who was married at 18, and also a guy who's presenting in drag.
It's so great to see American Idol more open and accepting of queer contestants as well. There was that one young man from the South who went viral for saying wig. Do you remember that? Oh, it was great. It was so funny. He just said wig, which is sort of an internet exclamation of excitement, and Katy Perry was like, wig? What did I know, wig? Let's wig together. It was great. It was silly. It was absolutely ridiculous, but it's been nice to sort of see that. Okay. Also on my TV radar, Drag Race Season 10 is on now. It aired a week after All Stars 3 ended. There was absolutely no breathing room in there. One of my personal early favorites, Miss Vanessa Vanjie Mateo, went home. She's a young Latina from Tampa. Well, she's a young Latino from Tampa, but there was my one home state competitor, Tampa, Florida. You repped us. You were great.
And we were taken to task for giving short shrift to Love, Simon, the gay teen movie, last week because we were running out of time. Actor Matt Bomer, soon to be in the revival of The Boys in the Band on Broadway, bought out the screening of Love, Simon in his hometown of Spring, Texas, and with his husband, Simon Halls, and he called it an important movie and a really good one. And we might want a little bit more in terms of sophistication and things like that. Yeah. But this has wide distribution. Absolutely. It has a star, Nick Robinson, who the kids know and they're going to see, and that's all good.
And it's a romantic comedy, you know what I mean? For once we're getting something lighthearted. I would love to see more. I would love to see 50 films like Love, Simon with a variety of different stars starring in it. You know, I think there's always a ways we can go with representation, but I am so excited about what this movie will do for young kids. You know what I mean?
Well, there was a movie called A Very Natural Thing in the early 70s when I was a kid, and my boyfriend at the time said, oh, it's just a soap opera. And I said, we're not on the screen. We're on the screen now. Would you take it easy? It's just a soap opera.
Yeah, it might not be your cup of tea. I am not terribly excited about the movie, but I am excited about the impact it will have and sort of what it does for young queer kids. So.
And I also saw this week Broadway by the Year again at Town Hall. This is where they take songs from 2 different years. They took, in this case, they took 1947, shows like Finnegan's Rainbow and Brigadoon, and 1966 with Cabaret. And it's wonderful, and it's run by a guy named Scott Siegel, who does wonderful social commentary. These musicals had a lot of social significance in their times, dealing with issues like racism, et cetera, sexism. And they're going to be doing it again May 21st. And June 18th, so I really recommended it. It's by comparison to what we're getting on Broadway these days, especially in terms of musicals.
Oh, sure, yeah.
It's great. All right, maybe we should talk about Angels in America. All right. Well, first of all, we have to give Ann Northrup's comments on Angels in America. Where are your comments, Ann? Okay. First of all, this Angels in America got a rave from the New York Times. Nothing can kill it. And Ann Northrup said it's a brilliant, profound work, and it was a privilege to sit through it for 8 hours. There's Ann.
Oh, there she is.
With Holland Taylor and Sarah Paulson, who are a lovely couple, there at the production that we saw on March 17th. And she said it's a privilege to sit through and let Tony Kushner's words and images wash through you. She says it's not quite up to the original on Broadway in 1993, but it still thrilled her. She calls it a must-see, especially if you've never seen it. I feel like I've now spent most of my life sitting through Angels in America.
It's a long play.
It's 2 plays.
Oh, man.
And it's about an era that I lived through and was very active in, 85, 86, the year. Of course, Tony's got, now there's a picture of Nathan Lane as Roy Cohn.
I love him.
Who is hilarious. Yeah. And the actor who was playing Belize, the nurse, is Nathan Stewart Jarrett. And actually, I think Belize is probably the sanest person in the show.
Sure, yeah.
What sitting there for another 8 hours watching this made me think that almost everybody in the show is nuts.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, crazy. And of course,
it was a wild time.
They make no, but I mean, it's how AIDS affected people. So these people are having projections of an angel visiting them, of hallucinations in terms of the young woman who's married to a Mormon closet case.
Right.
So there's a lot of that in the play. And you know, the other thing that happens is that Tony Kushner does not reference in the play that Roy Cohn was Donald Trump's lawyer. I don't know if he didn't know about that at the time when he wrote it. Maybe it wasn't as prominent a thing. But I think it's a revision that he could have put in.
Sure.
I mean, Edward Albee used to change some of his lines to update them a little bit.
I don't know if I want Trump and Angels in America, though. I don't know if I need him in there.
He could be on the phone. He could say, "Donald, I'm busy."
Oh God. Oh no.
And the audience would fall out. On the other hand, when you watch Cohn, since he was the mentor of Donald Trump, you think of Trump while he's doing it.
That's interesting.
He even
Nathan
talks
Lane
about,
have some,
I love chaos!
Yeah.
You know,
that's very Trumpian.
Yes.
Oh, jeez, yeah.
So ultimately, it is a play. It has some great scenes. I also think it has a lot of indulgent writing, too, that I don't get. But, and... You know, the coda to the play is set in 1990. I don't want to give anything away too much, but there's a more optimistic feeling. The Berlin Wall has found it. They haven't found a cure to AIDS at this point, and the show premiered in 1993 when they still didn't have it. But I think it left me feeling they were over optimistic about how good the world was going to get, because it's going to hell in a handbasket these days.
The 90s were an optimistic time. It was a fun era to grow up in.
Did you have?
Yeah, I saw a very moving post from Wilson Cruz. I think a couple of days ago or yesterday was World Theater Day, and he actually posted about the first time he saw Angels in America. At this point, he was already pretty well known for My So-Called Life, but I wanted to read a bit of it. Wilson Cruz writes, when I was a 20-year-old actor in the middle of shooting my first series, I went to NYC and all I wanted to do was see Angels in America. It was the biggest thing on Broadway, and I never thought I'd get in. I took a chance and walked up to the box office window and asked if there were any tickets available. The gay man behind the window started to tell me that they were sold out. He looked up at me, he stopped, and he said, are you that kid from My So-Called Life?
It was very big.
I said yes, and he took a deep breath, rolled his eyes, and said, hold on. He walked away and came back with a ticket for both shows and said, these are house seats. You, of all people, need to see this. I just thought that was such a great story. I've looked up to Wilson Cruz for a long time. He's a Puerto Rican gay actor.
Yes.
I'm a gay Puerto Rican, but yeah, I thought those were nice words to end with today.
He used to come by at Hetrick Martin when we worked there in the old days. And I will also recommend After Louis, Vincent Gagliostro's film about an aging, angry gay activist played by Alan Cumming. That's opening at Cinema Village on March 30th, and Alan Cumming is going to be there on March 30th if you go. And it's also going to be available on iTunes and VOD. And then we'll talk about, and we're going to include in our email an article by Alyssa Solomon arguing with Jesse Green over what are canonical gay plays. All right. Good to be with you.
Thanks. You too.
We'll see you next week.